Hey everyone, welcome back to Wise Guys Garage. Today's video we're going to be doing some more testing on my brother's '08 Camry V6 with the E351 manual transmission swap. Now if you guys have been following along this video series, we've been doing the majority of testing on his car, but I also wanted to introduce my 91 MR2 because we should both be able to hit that 300 wheel horsepower number, and that essentially has the exact same drivetrain in it. So in the previous video, I know I mentioned I wanted to test 87 versus 93 octane fuel with the 2GR FXE intake on my brother's car, but there's one more part I wanted to test before we get to that in today's video. So what's the part that we're going to be testing? Let's take a look. This is the part that we're going to be testing in today's video. Now, what are we looking at here? This is Frankenstein Motorworks' shortest runner intake plenum. Now, what does this include here? It includes this shiny bracket piece right here that converts it to the lower runners to the Holley plenum's adapter. And what is the Holley plenum? That is that guy right there. And you effectively bolt this on to the stock lower intake manifold. You swap around the VVTi actuators that are on both banks because it gives you a little bit more clearance. Bolt it on, install the gasket that's included with it, and then you install the plenum, and you're pretty much good to go. So if you guys are interested and you have a front-wheel drive power 2GR car, I can say it should fit in there. Now, if you have the ES350, the Aurion, and the Avalon, and you have the wiring harness that goes over the bank in like a V, you do have to just remove the plastic from the wiring harness. I highly recommend the high temp Tessa tape to wrap it around there. Basically set it up that way. You can re-neaten it whatever way you like. You don't need to cut any of the wires or place them anywhere else. It's just that plastic piece does hit this intake plenum when you install it in the car. You do all that, you can bolt it right in, and everything's all fine and dandy afterwards. Now, how much vertical clearance do we have? It actually had a good amount. It was about 1.5 inches from the top of the hood, or the under half of the hood, at the top of the Holley plenum what's installed in the car. So if you have like any of those front wheel drive cars that I mentioned, you should definitely clear. And if you also have like a Venza or a RAV4 or a Sienna, you should definitely not have to worry about it because those have way more vertical clearance than any of the front wheel drive cars that I mentioned prior. As I reinstall the intake manifold back on my MR2, it gives me some time to discuss the yellow Toyota MR2 that you guys saw earlier in the video. This car also has a 2GR FE, a different transmission. It has the original transmission that came with the car. It's the E153. I address a little bit more details about the car in the later part of the video when it's getting set up on the dyno. But effectively what we're seeing here is he's getting baseline numbers on his car because in the future, one of the other parts that we plan on testing is Frankenstein Motorworks' newly released part, which is the intake manifold spacer. Some prior testing has been done by another individual at Goodwill, and he did see significant gains with his setup by adding just the one spacer. It went to over 330 wheel horsepower, bone stock cams, 93 octane fuel, the V1 intake, and the spacer. Now in layman's terms, what this intake manifold spacer is actually doing is effectively just increasing the runner length to work a little bit better with the stock camshafts. Now, are we going to be testing that intake manifold spacer? Absolutely. I think it's going to be really cool to see the results of adding not only one spacer, but two spacers to the short runner intake plenum and seeing where it makes its peak power. Now, there's just one more quick thing I want to mention before we actually hit the dyno, and that is that my red MR2 now has 2GR FXE pistons, which increase the compression ratio, and it also has Frankenstein Motorworks' valve spring kit. This effectively allows the engine to rev at 8,000 RPMs. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be making power at that RPM, but it's just, I need to let you guys know that's the reason why it sounds so different in comparison to the other two 2GR powered cars in this video. Now that I got all that out of the way, let's finally hit the dyno to see how much power we're making. So we got the yellow MR2 on here. This is my buddy Logan's car right over there, and essentially he's doing it with the V1 intake. I'll give you a little bit more details on that later. He's got the Burke exhaust on his, TCS wide pipe, V1 intake, and the Frankenstein Motorworks QL tune or quality of life tune. It revs to 7,400 now compared to 7,200. There was a couple other things done with like the AC, cruise control, and things of that nature. 93 octane E153 transmission. What do you guys guess? Did you think it was going to make to the wheels? In my personal opinion, I think it'll make a little bit above 305, maybe 310 wheel horsepower, just because it's the E153 and they're known to suck like give or take about 510 wheel horsepower. Somebody who did a FXE setup, which is higher compression pistons, made 320 wheel with the same intake, so that's the reason why I'm around that number. So what we're gonna do, he's gonna get that set up completely, and then when that's all set, we'll run it on the dyno, do 3 pulls, and see what we make. Well, that's a lot less than I thought.
You're not gonna believe this.
You can keep an eye on the temp in the radio. Just put that on with the radio. I'll put it on when you get the car started. All right, so we're doing it with it in third gear right now. Let's see. It's all right. Not bad.
What gas do you have in there?
93. Sweet. Got a different intake.
That's it.
What was his?
I wasn't expecting 300.
A little bit more, but that's probably because of the gear. Yeah.
That's all.
Max
I
Smart,
think-
man.
Now that all the 2GR testing is done and out of the way, let's take a look at this V8 swap Toyota Hilux, and then there's also a Honda CRX with the D-Series swap running on Nitro after this. Alrighty guys, so now we're back with Dyno. Let's discuss some of the data that we learned in this video. So the yellow MR2, we'll start with that one because that was the first one of the Dyno. Let's just keep it numerical. The best run it made was around 275 wheel horsepower. Now if you guys remember, I did mention like something about, oh, let's address the V1 intake earlier in the video. Let's talk a little bit about that for now. So when Frankenstein Motorworks first came out with his first intake manifold for the 2GR FE, it originally was called the V1 intake, and that's just the name of it for short. So he put it on his 400 wheel horsepower build, and then immediately after uploaded a video putting it on a more stock style 2GR FE, and it made 313 wheel horsepower. That MR2 that he did testing on with the V1 intake and everything along those lines, that he ran on the dyno and he had it on video, it has pretty much the exact same setup as the yellow MR2, not my red one. So the yellow MR2 has the same V1 intake, same style headers if I'm not mistaken. It only made 275 wheel horsepower. It has less compression, I will note that, but you can mathematically calculate with some napkin math on what the gains would be in comparison to the stock compression ratio and the pistons that were in that white MR2. 2GR FXE pistons is the same one I actually have in my red MR2, are good for about 20 wheel horsepower. So take 313 minus 20, what are you at? Around 300 horsepower. Give or take a few wheel horsepower because every engine's, slightly different. Now, keeping this in mind, if 300 wheel horsepower is what we were expecting, and it only made 275, and it actually is making 300 wheel horsepower, just the dyno was off that day, then we would say, okay, well, it's actually pretty much spot on the power it's supposed to be making. Now, unfortunately, I do believe that the dyno is off from the runs that we just did in this video. The reason why I have that theory is not only was the yellow MR2 off, but the red MR2 was off about 20 wheel horsepower, and then the Toyota Hilux that has the 3UZ swap in it and the CRX that has the D series swap in it, those cars were both off about 20 wheel horsepower, what they were expecting. Now that Honda CRX has done multiple runs on the dyno, and he said it was down on power as well. I really don't know what would cause it, but we've done multiple runs at the same dyno. I just don't effectively see making the exact same power with the part that we swapped there. Now, if the reality is the case that it is 20 wheel horsepower off, that means that not only did his car make the right power, the yellow one, a red MR2 is around or over 300 wheel horsepower. That also means that the Camry, if it was at 258 in the video and it actually made 278, then that's an actual pretty dang good gain, especially since we're still on 87 octane when we did these runs here. I can't imagine more than a 10 wheel horsepower gain with 93 octane fuel, just due to the really small difference in comparison to knock resistance between 87 and 93. If we're at 278 with 87, and then we put 93 and it's at 288, we're creeping up to that 300 wheel horsepower number real quick, and I think that's pretty cool that we're finally starting to get close to it. Now, we are definitely going to go back to confirm if the dyno was actually off that 20 wheel horsepower number or not. I plan on testing my brother's car again on 87 octane fuel, see if it actually makes more than 258 wheel horsepower. My MR2, just due to the compression ratio, it being 12.5 to 1, I'm going to run it on 93 pretty much always, and I'm just waiting to get it scheduled with the yellow MR2 to go back and see when he's available, and we can do all the testing all together all at the same time again to see what we make. Now, what are some other parts that I plan on testing in the future with my brother's car? Let's take a look. This is a Lotus Evora S2 wide pipe. If you guys have been following along the video series, we already did swap out the wide pipe for the Lotus Evora S1 wide pipe. If I were to hold this one right next to the other one, you would see that this one's a lot thicker and should, in theory, flow a lot better in comparison to the other wide pipe. Obviously, as you can tell, the other wide pipe, or the S1 wide pipe, had a 2-bolt flange right here at the end and not this 90-degree bend that you see right here. I'm gonna have to modify it just a little bit in order to make it work a little bit better. I'm probably gonna delete this V-band and then put the 2-bolt flange so I can utilize the extension pipe that I installed on that F4Y pipe and go from there to get this all situated and work as best as possible in my brother's car. Now I do want to do one more run, like I said, with his intake set up at 87 octane fuel and see, just to double check the numbers that we got in this video. But after that's done, I plan on bolting this guy on there and then also running 93 octane fuel. And I also want to test these bad boys. Now, I know I mentioned these earlier. These are the intake manifold spacers that Frankenstein Motorworks does offer for the V1 intake. And this is effectively what they're doing. They're just adding a little bit runner length to make the runners a little bit longer to work with the stock camshafts. That's going to pretty much wrap it up for this video, guys. I just gave you a little sneak peek of what we have planned in the future. And I also want to thank all of you, every single one of you all that have been subscribed to the channel, because we most recently just hit the 1,000 subscriber mark. And for that, guys, I'm more than appreciative. Thank you, every single one of you, for liking, commenting, subscribing, asking a bunch of questions. It all helps the channel grow. The more people we can get in here, the more ideas I can get for future videos, and the more content that you guys will all see at the end of the day. So thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.